Fabiano Caruana starts the game with the move c4. We have English opening. His opponent Pragnanandhaa, GM from India, plays e6, and we have round 11 in Tata Steel chess tournament in Netherlands. Knight goes to c3, d5, d4, knight f6, and English opening transposed into a queen's gambit decline. Exchange variation, the pawns are exchanged on d5. Bishop goes to g5, pinning the knight to the queen. c6, supporting the pawn on d5. e3, and now the bishop can develop. Bishop d6, developing the bishop. Bishop d3. Now both bishops are occupying very nice diagonals. Short castle. Knight e2. The reason knight goes to e2 because the idea in these positions is to go f3 and e4 to occupy the center for white. Rook goes to e8, h3, prophylactical move not to allow in some variations, the black pieces to go to the square g4. Knight goes to d7, another developing move. Queen c2. And this is already a direct threat on the pawn on h7 because the knight who protects that pawn is pinned to the queen. And therefore, this pawn on h7 is already under attack. Next move is logical, knight f8 to protect the pawn on h7. And here comes a long castle. And anytime we have different side castles, white goes long and black goes short, we know that we are for a treat because the game would be very active and Pragnanandhaa immediately plays b5, starting attack on the queen side of the board. After b5, king b1, which is just a nice prophylactical move in those type of positions, a5. Pragnanandhaa goes all in. He starts attacking white king with the pawn storm. f3. The idea is to play e4, but in reality, this was too slow for Caruana. The right move here was e4 immediately, and on b4, they're on time to play e5, forking two pieces. And after b takes the knight, bishop takes f6, g takes f6, and e takes d6, taking the bishop back. After another capture of the pawn on b2, white actually can take the pawn on c6. And this position is absolutely fine for white. It's actually better for white because those pawns are doubled, they're very weak. The king is not safe at all, the black king. And b2 pawn actually is a safe haven for white king on b1. It's kind of getting protected by the opposite color pawn. So this was the variation that was better for white. Caruana played it too slow with the move f3. And immediately after bishop e7, now there is no pin on the knight and the knight can move freely. And therefore, Caruana takes that knight on f6, bishop takes the knight, and the bishop and e4. They control, white control the center, expanding the center in the center, but black makes, Pragnanandhaa makes a very nice move, a4. And now the idea behind this move is Pragnanandhaa wants to play b4, b3. The idea for black, and the typical theme in those type of positions, is to open the white king. And you need to break through those pawns. So b4, b3 is already a threat. Therefore, white plays a3 to block the pawn. b4, a takes b4, and now a3. And it turns out that this particular plan is not so good for black already. Because after b3, queen b6, attacking the pawn on b4 and putting pressure on the pawn on d4. King just goes to a2, And what happens is that in the previous variation, this pawn on a3 is actually a good pawn for white because their king is totally safe here, and the a file is blocked for black rook by its own pawn. Very typical idea in many positions to hide your king behind the opposition pawn. So this position became already more or less even. Black exchanged the pawns on e4, and now white has a very nice center with d4, e4 pawns. Black takes the pawn on d4. They're not afraid of any discovery attacks here. After the exchange, the bishop is actually blocked by its own pawn. Otherwise, it would take on h7 with the check, and with the next move, white would win the queen. So in this position, Caruana goes b5, and bishop d7. Now, it's important to know that you cannot take the pawn on b5 here, because after bishop takes b5, we have a double attack on the queen and the rook. Therefore, bishop d7 is a move that protects black position. Bishop c4, putting pressure on the pawn on f7 and also attacking the queen on d4. Black position became very unpleasant here. And as you can see, there are not so many moves where the queen can go. The queen went to a7, b took on c6, and Pragnanandhaa took back with the bishop on c6. And if we're looking at this position, white is better because their bishop is very active. Their rook can go to the f file and put more pressure on the pawn on f7, and their king is totally safe because of this black pawn on a3. So Caruana goes rook f1, putting pressure on f7 pawn. It had to be protected, and Pragnanandhaa plays rook e7, and knight d5, very active move with the knight attacking the rook on e7, and the rook goes away to b7. Rook f5, that actually wasn't the best idea from Caruana, and the waste of move, really. I think that his idea was to double the rooks and still put pressure on the pawn on f7. But with the simple move rook with the bishop e8, it would always be protected. So the move rook f5 wasn't really the best continuation here. Rook c8, putting the rook on the c file, kind of x-raying the queen on c2. Caruana plays puts the queen away on d3. Knight, Pragnanandhaa activates the knight on e6, and rook f1, putting another piece to attack the pawn on f7. And here, the move I was talking about before, bishop goes to e8, and this pawn on f7 is totally protected. And white has to go back to f2. And here, black's position is becoming already better. They defended their weakness on f7, and now they can pressure white on the files b and c. And queen goes to b8 to do exactly that. Rook c2, knight activates on c5, nice square for the knight, also attacking the queen. The queen goes to e3, and that was the first kind of major mistake of the game by Caruana. The correct move here was queen e2. And the reason queen e2 is better because you have to protect that square on b2, which becomes the decisive factor of the game. So after queen e3, Pragnanandhaa makes a great move. Knight takes b3. Totally dismantling white's position and totally getting through to the white king. Rook b1. Now the knight on b3 is actually under attack. So Pragnanandhaa defends it with the move a4. Not only defends it, but also activates its bishop, and now all black pieces are in absolutely great position to attack the white king. Bishop d3 is another mistake by Caruana. Now both players are very much under time pressure here. 1 minute remaining on the clock for Caruana to make to make 6 moves, and 2.5 minutes remaining from Pragnanandhaa. So after bishop d3, black's position is totally winning after knight c5. Another great move. Everything is under attack. The rook is under attack on b1. The rook is under attack on c2. Caruana plays knight e7. Not a bad idea to continue the game, because now you cannot take the knight on e7 because your queen is under attack. And Pragnanandhaa very calmly put the king on h8. Caruana takes the rook on b7. Pragnanandhaa takes back. And in this position, not much white can do. If Caruana takes the knight, checkmate on b2. If he takes a rook, then black just takes the rook on c2, and again threatening the checkmate. And the bishop is under attack, and the knight is under attack, so everything is under attack here. So in this position, for exchange of the rooks, Caruana plays bishop a6, putting the bishop under attack of all white pieces. Now again, black pieces, I'm sorry. Now again, Pragnanandhaa has to be a little careful here. Cannot take the bishop with the knight, for example, because then he will lose a queen. There is a checkmate otherwise. So in this position, black just takes the knight on e7, and Caruana resigned. He resigned because black has an extra piece, an extra knight, and a totally winning position. Let's say if bishop takes c8, then simply bishop takes c2. The knight is protected. On top of that, black has an extra pawn, which is very close to being a queen. So very nice win by Pragnanandhaa, who now has 7.5 points out of 11, and the best American player of the last decade, Fabiano Caruana, unfortunately has only 5.5 out of 11 and now out of contention for the first 3 spots in the standings. The next game I want to show you from this moment. It's the game between Alexei Sarana, who is the Russian Grandmaster representing Slovenia, and Pentala Harikrishna, Indian Grandmaster. Both players are in the middle of the standings, and in this particular position, which is even, white probably should have played either queen b2 or queen b3, but for some unexplainable reason, Sarana plays queen b1. And it's really unexplainable because after Hare Krishna activates the knight on e5, Sarana puts the queen on b3. So if you wanted to put the queen on b3, why would you need to make it in 2 moves? So that's a loss of a tempo, which on grandmaster level is huge. And now black has immediate advantage. b5. The move is made in order to protect the square on c4, which is a very nice post for the knight. White goes h3, prophylactical move, and black continues with their idea to put the knight on very nice square on c4. Rook c1. Hare Krishna gains the center of the board with the move e5, e4 to block the pawn, because already if black played e4, that would be unpleasant. Bishop e6, putting an X-ray attack on the white kings, on the white queen. The white plays knight d5, which blocks the bishop. Some exchange happened on the square d5, knight takes d5, t takes d5, and bishop, who was under attack, goes to on the square of d7. Here Serena makes another mistake, in this case already a pretty bad mistake. He takes the knight on c4. The knight, I guess, was so annoying that he decided to take it with the bishop, and I'm not sure if he didn't see the continuation. I'm sure he saw it, but probably didn't estimate what will happen in this position, because after black takes the bishop on c4, rook takes c4, black has the move bishop a4, winning an exchange, attacking the queen, and the queen goes away. The rook would be under attack. So after queen takes a4 and rook takes c4, again, black has an extra exchange for a pawn. White has 6 pawns against 5. And I think after queen takes a6, what Sarana was thinking, that he has two passing pawns on the queen side of the board, and that's more than enough to compensate for the exchange that he, I would guess, sacrificed. But in reality, Indian grandmaster playing black had no issues capitalizing on the material advantage here. Queen c7, protecting the rook. b5, immediately going forward with one of the pawn. Queen c8. You don't want to exchange the queens if you are white in this position, because you are without material already, so you want to keep the queens on the board. But after queen a8, if you move the queen away now, the pawn on a3 will fall. So that's why after b6, there is exchange that black wanted, the exchange of the queens. Now black has to make some precise move. They start with not the best move in this position, but not the worst either. Rook a8 makes total sense, attacking the bishop, and when the bishop goes away, pawn on a3 will fall again. Bishop goes to b4. Bishop takes b4. Here b7, attacking the rook. And here what's interesting, that, again, as I mentioned, Hare Krishna had to make some precise moves. So he moved the rook to, let's say, logical square on b8, immediately blocking and attacking the pawn on b7. White would save the game with the move knight takes e5, attacking the rook on c4. And the continuation could be rook e4, knight c6. A rook has to take the pawn on b7, and then the pawn takes the bishop. And this particular position is already a draw, because white has 2 extra pawns for an exchange and a very active knight on c6. So it was important not to play rook b8 here, but Hare Krishna made the right move, rook e8. What's important, that he protected that very vital pawn on e5. d6, the pawns look dangerous, but not a big deal for black. They just take the pawn on d6, because remember that white never took the bishop on d6. So bishop takes d6, rook takes d6, and f6. Again, supporting the pawn on f6 one more time. Rook d7, blocking the pawn with rook b8, attacking the knight attacks the rook. Rook just goes away. Double attack on the knight and the rook. And after this exchange, knight b3, d3, and white resigned. Resigned because they lose the pawn on b7. And after they lose the pawn on b7, they will lose the pawn on a3. And with an extra exchange, black is easily winning this position. If you're trying to protect the pawn on b7, then d2, and next move, the pawn will become a queen. So the win by Hare Krishna, and now he has 5.5 out of 11. The next game is between Vincent Keimer, German grandmaster, and one of the leaders of this tournament, Nazarbek Abdusadorov from Uzbekistan, who had 7 out of 10. And I want to start with this position. After bishop took on c5 and b takes c5, now you couldn't take with the queen because the bishop on f4 was under attack. So that's why white has to take with the pawn. And now, as you can see, those pawns are pretty ugly. And on top of that, Keimer only has 2 minutes on the clock, so he is under severe time pressure. And in this particular position, Noderbeck had to play g5. That was the winning move. Not only is the best move in this position, but it also, considering that Keimer is under time pressure, that would have created a lot of problems for white in this position. After exchange of the pawns, the bishop is under attack, so it has to take the pawn on g5. And then black plays rook d3, attacking the queen. And after queens, let's say, goes to c1, then queen takes f2, and the rook is lost. So in this particular position, uh, the best move for white, and it was very difficult move to find, to be honest, with 2 minutes on the clock, was e6. And the trick here is that if black takes the queen in this position and bishop takes e3, you can still try to hold this position for white because you have a lot of pawns. You have a bishop who will protect all those pawns. And also you have a threat of bishop d4, which could lead to black losing material. So that was a nice variation, and black just had to go for it. But unfortunately, Nazarbek either didn't see it or didn't calculate till the end, and instead he played rook d3 immediately. And after rook d3, white moved the queen to c1 because they still have to protect the bishop on f4. F takes e5, again attacking the bishop. Now if the bishop just goes away, queen f2 check, um, that would be devastating. So knight bishop takes e5, very nice tactical shot. And now you cannot take the bishop because after rook takes d3, the pawn is pinned. So you couldn't take the bishop, but obviously you could take the pawn on f2. And Noderbeck just did it exactly that. The good news for white here is the bishop protects the rook on g3. So white position is not immediately lost. Kings go away to h2, rook takes g3, bishop takes g3, and queen takes c5, takes the pawn. And in this particular position, black, Noderbeck Abdusadorov, has an extra pawn and a totally winning position. Keimer plays bishop c7 to protect an important pawn on a5. Black goes rook f7 and attacking the bishop. Queen d2. You cannot take the bishop now because after um, queen d8 it's a checkmate. So you have to be careful for black not to take the bishop. Obviously, the grandmaster of that level do not miss those type of things. And h6 to create a luft for the king, so there is no checkmate. Bishop b6 attacking the queen. Queen, here is the most important moment of this game. In this particular position, black should have played pretty much any move with the queen, let's say queen h5, and continue dominate with an extra pawn on e4 and attacking all these weak pawns for white. Instead, absolutely difficult to explain, but Abdusadorov plays queen e7. And as many and as grandmasters know, obviously, in this type of positions, when you have a dark square bishop against a light square bishop, it's usually a draw if you exchange the queens and move queen e7 basically allowed white to exchange the queens on d8. Immediately queen d8 check, queen take d8, bishop take d8, and this position is a draw. There were some other moves made. I'll go quickly. It's again, it was a long game, but in all these variations, in all the positions, this is the draw. And after a lot of maneuvers, this was the longest game of the day. I apologize for going so quickly, but not at any point Black could win this. They agreed to a draw on move 78. This particular position I want to show you for one reason. Jordan Van Foreest is playing against Arjun Erigaisi. Netherlands against India. Both grandmasters do not have a good tournament at all, especially disappointing for Arigasi, who was the second highest rated player in this tournament with 2801 rating before the tournament started. So this position is move 20. Move 20. Take a look at the time on Jordan Van Forest clock. 1 hour 42 minutes. Now, as a reminder, they start the game with 1 hour and 40 minutes, and there is additional 30 seconds for each move made. So basically, Jordan Van Forest made all these moves without thinking at all. So he obviously was very well prepared for this opening. He knew it by heart, every move. And this position is very interesting, very active. The both kings are in the middle of the board, queens are still on the board. All sorts of threats are present, and you would have thought that this game would end quickly with somebody checkmating the other side. Unfortunately, this game ended in a boring draw. Now, this seems like a deadly threat, attacking the queen, and if the queen goes away, attacking the knight. Thankfully for black, they have an answer for that with the move rook c8, counter-attacking the queen. And here, a lot of things could have happened, but unfortunately, again, it was a quick draw. Queen g3, queen b6, bishop went to f4 because it was under attack, it had to be protected. G6, the pawn now had to be protected. Queen goes to f2, exchange of the queens, e5 attacking the bishop, bishop goes back, check, exchange of bishop on the knight, and after a couple of more moves, exchange of the rooks, rook a3, and in this position, which is totally even position, in the rook endgame, uh, both players agreed to a draw. Also interesting to notice that both players played at 99.5% accuracy in this game. Finally, the world champion Gukesh playing against Wei Yi. And the only thing I wanted to mention here is compared to the previous game, this is move 11 of the game. And take a look at the clock. More than an hour Gukesh spent on the first 11 moves, although this position actually is pretty standard. There is not much to think about. Grandmasters know this by heart, a lot of those moves and positions. And Grandmaster from China, Wei Yi, spent 1 hour and 12 minutes to get to this position. The rest of the game was uneventful and ended in a quick draw. So let's take a look at the standings. Gukesh is still the leader with 8 points out of 11. Great result, by the way. Second place and third place are tied. Nodirbek Abdusadorov, Uzbekistan, Pragnanandhaa Ramesh Babu, India, 7.5 points. And only those three players have a chance to get the first place with 2 rounds remaining. Wei Yi, Anish Giri, and Fedoseev, all three of them have 6 points, but maximum they can get if they win the remaining 2 games would be 8 points. So tomorrow is the next round, the decisive round, one of the decisive 2 remaining decisive rounds, and we'll be here analyzing the games. Hopefully, will be a lot to discuss. I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, thank you for watching.